Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Kiwi Talks. My guest today is an underappreciated legend, in my opinion, who's worked on game franchises such as Quake, Portal, Left 4 Dead, World of Warcraft, and Metroid Prime. I'd like to welcome David Kirsch, aka Zoid, aka Zoida-san. How you doing?
Yeah, welcome to. Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah. Speaking of Zoida-san, can you take me through that meeting when he dropped that bomb on you? Was it an out of body experience when he said it? Like a bit of a did he just say what I think he
It
said?
was a little bit of that. We were doing a video conference with Nintendo at Retro. This is probably late 2001, mid 2001, and late 2001 sounds right. And we were going over. No, it might have been 2002 because this was I think just before E3, and we were talking about some. We were going over we had most of the game blocked out by then, and I had a couple little boss designs I did. I did like the incinerator drone, which every speedrunner hates, and a few other ones. And we were going. I think Miyamoto had a question about the incinerator drone, and so he mentioned, "Oh, Zoid designed that." And so he turned to me and he said, gave me the question, and then I think I answered him, and he said, "Thank you, Zoido-san." And I'm like, "Did he just?" Did I was like, so I thought that was a lot of fun.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, it was neat, and it was cool to be part of that conference and everything, because I mean he's basically the best game designer in the world, right? So
Yeah.
our first example, I remember when he came over to visit Retro. This is when we had the first prototype of Prime running. It's some of the Space Pirate frigate at the start of the game, and he play tested it. And I remember him in the first 5 minutes, he named like a dozen things that should be fixed, and they were all right. Like the scale feeling of Samus and some of the control stuff. And you could just tell that he knew exactly what he was talking about, and just brilliant, brilliant designer.
So were you aware of some of this stuff before he pointed it out, and you just hadn't gotten around to fixing it, or was it a fact that he pointed it out and then you were like, ah,
I think it's a little of both.
hmm,
I think his comments on scale, I don't think we were thinking about, because when we originally designed level, Samus was the camera's a little lower, and he said that the first thing he said is you need to make Samus taller, like you need to scale the world down, right? And I'm thinking game, the actual camera height is like 2 meters, right? Which he's right. I think if you look at the suit, I think the suit's supposed to be about 2 meters tall, and he picked up on that immediately. And so it was just interesting to see that. Um, but I don't remember the other specific stuff. But it was lots of little tiny control and other things that were all just really good notes.
so moving the camera by a fraction, does that actually take a long time? Just
No,
something as
no,
subtle as that?
you
Yeah.
you just change the z coordinate, right?
Right.
So and but it's something like it's a very simple thing, but it's something you really got to tune to be right, and it's good that you get it early because a lot of your world design goes around that view, right?
Hmm.
So um, like a good example of how the world design is when we built areas in Metroid, we did something called blue rooms, which like this blueprint texture. And then I would come in and as a gameplay programmer, I would work with some of the designers, and I would do a lot of scripting of the puzzles and stuff like that. And the counter guys would come in, so we get most of the room functioning. And then once the base design is done, we then hand that room to the artists, and they loved it because the room was mostly functional. They knew exactly where the player was going to be looking when they walked in, where they were going to be doing interactives, stuff like that. So they knew where to focus their art, right?
Hmm.
Because they know, oh, the player's gonna be looking here when they first walk in the room, and this is where they're going to be getting the boost ball, fighting the or doing the jumps to the boost ball or something, so they can focus their art pass there. So it works really well. And it also, from of course, in game development, if you have a room done and arted and you want to make a change, that's incredibly expensive.
Hmm.
So we wanted to get the functionality of the rooms all done before we set it to the art, right? And of course we work with artists to understand, this room is in the ruins, this is the kind of theme we're going for, and stuff like that. So um,
Hmm.
and having once Miyamoto came in the early prototype and gave us a lot of feedback on view and control and everything, we nailed all that stuff down really early, which made all that much easier.
Because I imagine the morph ball would have been the hardest thing in terms of
Yes.
scripting it.
So the morph ball, I mean, a lot of the morph ball work was done by the late Mark H. Hutchison, of course.
That you work
I
closely with.
worked extremely closely with him since I was the senior gameplay programmer and he was the player control camera programmer. So he did all the player controls and worked on like the morph ball transition camera. And actually, I'm sure you know he wrote a wonderful book that he published.
On
It was
cameras.
published just after he passed away on all the work he learned about the camera systems. And so I worked a lot, very closely with him, and like one of my favorite things we did with him was, we came up with the 2D view for the morph ball puzzles, right? You morph and you roll in, and then the camera switches to the 2D side view, and you bomb your bombs and stuff. And we were trying to figure out how do we do the camera to follow the ball, and he came up with what he calls a surface camera. So we have a surface outside there, and the camera slides along the surface and has a set of springs that follows the ball, so it does it smoothly. And so you can define the surface area of the camera, so you can control the view, and you can do stuff like different zooms and everything. And it was really cool. And that was one. He had so many camera systems. He had the surface camera. He had the morph ball camera, which followed the ball. So the way that the third party, so when you turn the morph ball, right, there's the camera comes out of Samus, you turn to the ball, and then what the camera is on is it's actually, the way you think about it is like a parachute. And so the ball's here and the camera's the parachute there, and the lines of the parachute are springs. So if the morph ball goes behind something, like here's a glass case and it goes behind, or actually camera goes behind it, so it's partially occluded there, some of the springs of the parachute will pull, so the camera will turn to follow the ball, but the springs take time. So if the morph ball goes quickly there, the camera will move a little bit, but then follow the ball there. So if you go behind a post, the camera won't snap. It'll take time, but if you go past the post, it'll catch the ball on the way out. And that was one of the innovations he did. And because, like a lot of games, like WoW does this all the time. If you walk in front of an occluder, the camera immediately zooms in on you, and then as soon as the occluder's gone, and it's very disconcerting, right? And so he came up with a really amazing solution for that. And if you hide behind the post, eventually the springs will pull the camera in to you right by the post. So it's a really cool system. But yeah, so working with him, we worked with all those different systems, right? Because I was scripting I've scripted probably more than half the puzzles in the game, working with the designers, and I was doing the implementation. And so I was working a lot of closely with him on the camera systems, like, when you bomb into a slot, how does the camera look from that slot? Like the 3 slots above the bowling puzzle room where you do the bowling, there's a specific camera. When you pop in, there's a specific camera position that gets activated to see all 3 slots and stuff like that. And those were the systems I worked with him to make all that work. So yeah, and probably, speaking of a gameplay programming, like he was focused on cameras. That was his big work contribution. I swear my biggest contribution in the game is doors.
Well, because it hides memory, doesn't it? Or
yeah, it hides loading, and just the way they work, and there's so many systems dependent on them, and so I spent so much time on just doors. And we came up with you shoot it in the blue, like force field goes away to let you know acknowledgement that the door is going to open. But of course, we have to wait for the GameCube to actually load the area behind it, and then do that. And so there was just doors, and then we had horizontal doors in Metroid 1, so we had those, and we had to figure out how to make those work. And it was just and understanding, trying to help the designers realize, if you have a big room, put a longer hallway in front of it, because if they morph down a straight hallway, they're going to get there long before the area is loaded. Right. So there's some examples of that, like the area where you fight Ridley with the artifact.
The artifact temple, yeah.
The artifact temple. There's a fairly short hallway in front of it, so I don't know if when you get there, you're waiting a good 10 seconds sometimes, which is kind of, because that's actually one of the biggest rooms in the game in terms of memory, because it's just huge, right? So, So those are always challenging, and the triggers too. So the way the rooms work is, the basic design of the game is you have area, hallway, area, right? And so you have a big area, you go in the hallway, and as you're going down the hallway, we're throwing away that area, and then as you get near the other end, we load the other one. And so there are triggers we place along the hallways, and a big trick of that is knowing where to put the loading areas. So how far down the hallway should we start loading the other one, right? And so there was a lot of tweaking to try and get all that working, and try to get the load times acceptable. So,
Because didn't you get like an open source compression library or something to
so,
expand?
so, so
to expand the rooms?
this saved our bacon. So one of the problems with the areas is we actually, our tools are really cool because an area, consists of, scripts and creatures and textures and collision geometry and everything. And we actually, the tools, when we were packing it for the disk, we put everything into one big chunk. So everything that required to play that area was one load. And the GameCube had the ability to say, go load this off the disk into this section of memory. Tell us when it's done. Right. So it all's done asynchronously by the hardware. And the problem was, we wanted to compress it because it compresses really well because there's a lot of repeated, texture data and stuff. The problem is most compression libraries, the way they work is you load a compressed version, put it in memory, then you have to uncompress it into another chunk of memory, and then you have to throw the compressed copy away. And so, say if you get 50% compression, that means you can only use about 75% of your memory to load something, right? Because you 25% of it, the compressed copy is still here, and you need another 50.
Yeah.
And so we came across an open source compression library that supported decompressing in the same memory space as the original memory copy. So we would save what the uncompressed size was, allocate that, load the compressed copy into the upper part of the memory. So you have a memory like this, and we load the compressed copy here, and then say uncompress it here, and then we go whoop and uncompress over the top of the compressed copy until it was done. And so what that does is you don't have to allocate a copy to the compressed copy here. You put it all in the same space. You just load the compressed version in the top, and then it uncompresses from the bottom up over top of the compressed copy until it gets to the end. And that effectively allowed us to almost, double the area, the memory we could use for an area. And then I remember we contacted the author and said, "Hey, can we license this? We would like to use this in our games." And we worked out a licensing agreement, and yeah, that library led us to really increase the fidelity of the areas, and it saved memory fragmentation because each area can just be allocated once, because memory fragmentation was always a kind of a big issue. So very, very useful library. I don't remember the name of it, but it's probably out there somewhere.
Because it seems like in Prime 2 you pushed everything to the limit, because it's like Prime 1 on steroids in terms of like morph ball puzzles and even the areas, right?
And Mark A. Hutchinson came up with what I call the spindle camera, which is like I did an encounter in Metroid 2 where you're in a tube and you're on morph ball tracks, and there's like these arms that come down and try to kick you off, and the camera is falling outside of the tube. That's his spindle camera, right? Because it's on a big spindle.
Yeah,
it follows you around, and it's used quite a few times in Prime. I think a couple boss fights use it and everything. That was one of the new cameras he developed for Prime 2. Because we just, once in Prime 1, we were still, learning the system. Like the compression library didn't come in until later in the project, so some of the older areas were small because we didn't know how much memory we would have. And then Prime 2, we knew exactly what kind of things we can limit, how much we can push it, how much we can do the Dark World versions and all that stuff. I remember doing the Dark World transitions. Those are all loads that are hiding, when you enter the portal, and they see same as zipping along, and all it's all just hiding the load to the other area. Because the tricky part is in Metroid 1, you're in a room, you go into the hallway. As you're going down the hallway, we're unloading that room and loading the next one. Yep. When you go to the Dark World, you're just teleporting from in the same place. So we had to do a transition screen to unload the area you're in and load the one you're going to.
That would have been the same with the elevators as well, right? When you go.
So the elevators, So we broke up Metroid 1 into, I think, 5 worlds: ruins, the fire world,
Talon, magma,
Spandrella drifts,
Phazon. Yeah, I think it's
Phazon
five.
mines. Yeah,
Impact Crater, maybe 5, 6.
In-
Yeah.
yeah, and the space frigate at the start. So
Yeah,
6.
yeah.
And so those were broken up for a couple of reasons. One is when you're actually moving through the world, we don't when you walk through a door, we're not actually teleporting Samus. She's actually coordinate wise, actually physically moving through the environment. We're just loading the environment around her through the door loads. So it's actually a seamless physics transition, which is cool because we don't have to worry. Some games when you like walk through a door and they want to move you to a different area, they actually have to physically teleport you, and those can cause bugs, right? Because you're basically changing the coordinates. So it was cool that, and so, but you can only have worlds that are so much of a size, right? Until the numbers get too big, and so breaking the worlds up into sections like that. Also, the elevators let us. The sound system we used for the GameCube dev kit did not support dynamic sound loading, and so or changing sounds. So we're changing sound banks during the elevator transitions. So I remember that was a big part of the reason why we put elevators in as well. So yeah, so because sounds are dependent on the creatures and everything in the area, and so a lot of sounds are in the sound bank, and that takes a certain amount of memory, and those are changed during the elevator transitions.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff hidden there. And I remember, I don't know if Jack mentioned this in his interview, but he did, because the elevator transition sequence they're not actually levels, they're just hard coded kind of graphic systems. And he did a crossfade in that because he's like, I can do a crossfade here. And if you've watched Samus Arrives, there's a crossfade of her. He was really excited for doing the crossfade there because you can't really do crossfades in game because you're having to render twice.
Yeah.
And so, but in the elevator, you got plenty of, you're just drawing an elevator. So I remember him being really excited when he got the crossfade working.
Is it true that you removed horizontal doors from Prime 2 because of the screw attack? Because of
that is absolutely true.
Yeah.
It just the complexity of trying to get Samus, she just kept getting on the environment, right? Just the way the doors are done. If you screw attack through a horizontal door, and also it was just a nightmare of bugs. So I had to go to the designer and says, please, I can't fix this. Like the screw attack is an amazing thing, but it's just not compatible with horizontal doors. And so they agreed with me, and we pulled. I think we only had 3 or 4 in the game at that point, so they just redesigned the areas to not include them, which is great. I mean, the nice thing is without them, you can screw attack through vertical doors. So. But
so
yeah,
I suppose that would have been just an expansion on the morph ball camera in terms of how it pulls back.
Yeah, but the motion is insane, right?
Yeah.
It's a super fast horizontal motion, right? And it's doing this too. And so for a horizontal door, it was doing, you could kind of get this weird thing where you can bounce in and out, and it just draws all kinds of wet. And I think the camera would wig out crazy too, because you're going through a door and out, and it's just weird. So the cameras, the screw attack definitely leveraged a lot of the morph ball camera stuff.
Yeah. But like also you'd have sections where it would kind of change camera, and then you'd do like the wall jump thing with the screw attack.
And that's using the surface camera, right? That's so we have a trigger when you enter that volume, and I think when you enter screw attack or morph ball or jump mode or whatever, it pulls the camera back to the surface, and then the surface camera follows you as you go up. So
wow, because even though it's a first-person game, you've got to always have that camera ready, I suppose.
Yeah, honestly, like I don't think people realize that Metroid Prime has probably one of the most complicated third-person camera systems in a game. Even though it's a first person, like most of the time you're doing first person, there's an incredibly complicated third-person camera system in there, mostly because of the morph ball. And of course, in Prime 2, we leveraged it for all kinds of stuff like the screw attack and sidewall jumps and all that crazy stuff. Because once we built the systems for this camera system, we're like, hey, we can leverage this for all kinds of cool stuff. So,
did you? Because you would have scripted quite a few bosses in Prime 2 in regards to morph ball stuff.
Yeah, actually, most of the designers had learned the scripting system very well at that point. So other than mostly dealing with complicated things or bug fixes, most of the bosses were done by the designers of the boss themselves.
Oh wow.
So Prime One, I had to do a lot more of it because I was still developing the system as we did. So we had the world editor Rude Retro Utility Development Environment, I think, or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
And we were developing. So it's the scripting system is a visual scripting system where you can place objects in the world, and you can place like a trigger volume and have it send a message to an object to do something. Change a morph ball puzzle or rotate this object. We have action controllers and stuff. So it's a very visual scripting system. So you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. Like if you morph ball bomb into a bomb slot, and then you have a trigger in there that's affected by bomb damage. When they bomb again, then that could send a message to, this object over here to rotate up to let the player through or something. That's all done in the scripting engine in the editor. It doesn't require any code. And so I worked with Frank LaFuente, who was the lead engineer on Metroid Prime 1 on designing the visual scripting system. And as I was training designers with it, during Prime 1, compressed timeline, a lot of it I just got to, you got to ship the stuff. So designers I'd work with them or just script stuff for them just to get things done. But in Prime 2, they'd become far more familiar with the system. And there were times where they built entire puzzles without even any involvement with me, which was amazing, right? Because I'd come and see this, oh, well, this is a cool puzzle you built, and then I could come in and optimize things and fix any little edge case bugs or whatever. I remember one of the last set of things I fixed in Prime 1 was, we have a cinematic camera system. Like when you go to save station, there's a little cinematic.
Yeah.
There's lots. Enter Phenomena Drifts as a cinematic. So we have a little cinematic camera system that Mark HH had written, and there were a lot of little one-frame glitches in that. Just the way things were optimization, like because when you switch from one camera to another, the message to move Samus might happen before that one, so you get like the camera's there, and then you see Samus one frame later. And there was probably a couple dozen little one-frame glitches, and I went through and fixed them all because they were driving me crazy. But it's those little things you have to really polish to make a game awesome, right? It's something a game player probably wouldn't even care about or notice, but it's those things that I remember really wanting this game to be amazing. So I wanted to fix every little thing.
So were you aware of the special project you were working on, or how good it was going to be, or it wasn't until E3 when you started getting the reaction where you were like, okay?
So I knew that it was going to be an amazing game pretty early, because when we got the Space Frigate mostly functional, it was fun. Like playing it was fun, and I'm like, this is really good, And as we started working on the next area, which I think was the ruins, and expanding beyond then, and the things are starting to come together, the scripting system and the camera systems and the morph ball, and Andy O'Neill, the late Andy O'Neill's working on the physics for the morph ball, and they were coming in, and everything just started to come together. You realize, hey, this game's gonna be good. But yeah, and it wasn't until E3 that we knew it was going to be great, right? Because the response at E3 was just phenomenal, right? And it was so amazing to see people's reaction to the game and just, wow, this is awesome, and not realizing that a first person Metroid can work. And it was I remember being at that E3, and it was just one of the best times ever because it was just so much excitement.
Well, the pacing of that game is so good. I know you worked on the tutorial. And that's one of the most important parts, I think, of a game, right? Because it's the first section.
I worked with Mark Pacini on that to that first section where you got to target the nodes and shoot the force fields and everything. We iterated on that quite a bit, and that the ones that forces you to aim up and all that stuff. And how do you teach the game in 30 seconds to the player, right? And we really tried to nail that. We built a couple of versions of that before we got it there.
I was going to say with the Parasite Queen, because if you lock on to the Parasite Queen, you can fire a missile at its head instead of its belly. Is that right? And
if you scan it,
sorry.
If you scan it, it switches the lock-on point from her center to her face, which takes more damage. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a design idea to try and encourage players to scan things, because later bosses tell you stuff if you scan them. Like Flagrat bombed the bomb the things under her, right? Like if you scan her, it tells you that stuff. So that one was just blatant. Like, we'll make the boss easier if you scan her. And actually, that boss fight was interesting because the Parasite Queen was one of the first boss concepts I think that came out of the design team, and we were trying to figure out how to build it. And we come up with the lock-on system, and the idea we wanted to teach players how to lock on and strafe. And then I came up with the idea of the shields that come down, and then to encourage the player to move with the shield so they learn to slide to rotate around with the lock on. And so I scripted the shield system and and that all worked out. And they've worked out great. Like, I think it really taught players the effectiveness of circle strafing, which is, as a guy who worked on Quake, circle strafing's everything in FPS games.
Of course, yeah, that's right.
So,
yeah. So how often would you sit in a meeting and they'd have design ideas and you're looking at it from an engineering point and being like, I don't know if that's possible?
Not that often, actually. A lot of the designers, some of the boss fights. I remember Metroid 2, Mark Pacini really wanted to do a canyon system where you're fighting on top of Samus's ship. And I don't know if Jack mentioned it, but we were just like, we don't know how we'd pull that off technically. Like, you wanted to fight a boss while you're on the ship flying down a canyon, and we were just like, I don't know how we can do that. So I just remember that one was one of the like I don't think we can do that. We can't do that. But most of the times it was more understanding their design ideas and working with them to how do we translate that to work in the game, right? And how and a lot of it was approached of how does the player interact with this. How does we communicate to the player the status of what's going on? That's always the approach I've taken. Like on Flagra, the yellow flashing and the red flashing to indicate damaged sections and stuff like that. I remember like the red flash you get when you damage something like a block or a boss or everything. That's a very specific color of red I worked with the design team to get the design language consistent through the game. Right? Like, this is the color something flashes when it is damaged. And so everything in the game has that same red hue when damaged. And so when you're working with design, and it's things like that, right? Like to communicate to the player different statuses quickly, like, because once you learn that red, because the player, if you see that red, it means I'm doing damage, and the rest of the game works that way. Immediately, especially like a good example is on the Space Pirates that are elemental driven. They have to have the right beam to hit them. They're red if you hit them and yellow if you don't, right? So it's immediate design language, if you're hurting them or not.
Right. Yes.
Right. So, and
small,
so I remember
subtle things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's these subtle things that players don't think about, but we're trying to communicate that very quickly to the player. And so with boss designs, a lot of it is that type of stuff. It's not so much what we can do technically. It's we can do almost anything technically, assuming within memory limits. It's how does this work with the player, right? And then working from that standpoint. So yeah, the scripting system in Metroid that Frank and I worked on are pretty much limitless. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff in it. The best example is the power bomb maze, right? That's all done with the scripting system. You can build all kinds of crazy puzzles. There's a maze in Metroid 2, I think, where you're fighting a little boss, and it's a morph ball maze, and there's a little guy. I forget the name of the boss. It's like a little slug guy. You have to bomb around and stuff like that.
Is it Spider-Ball Guardian?
Yeah.
Is that the one? Yeah.
And that's basically a big 2D combat maze on the wall. You're fighting with your morph ball, and that's all done just with the scripting system. It's like really cool. And I didn't actually work on that. Most of the designers built that themselves. I had a couple little bugs to fix with it, but.
So from a scripting standpoint, was there something in particular that just took you ages to get right?
So the first room we scripted once I got the scripting system mostly complete was the bowling system with the turn. I forget the name of that room. where the Chozo statue picks you up and throws you in through the thing.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Yeah, and that was one of the rooms one of the early designers came up. One of the first designs came up with because they wanted this concept of the statue bowling you. And so because we had a bunch of room designs on paper at that point, that they had spec'd out. So I picked that one because that one looks really hard. Let's do that one first because we can pull that off, then we can do the other ones.
Yeah.
And so I spent probably a month getting that room working, just because it showed me the limitations of the scripting system. And what's funny is the scripting system, you're placing these objects. So like, the trigger for you when you drop into the hands of the statue, there's a trigger there that activates when you're a morph ball form, and then he grabs it, and then that sends a message to the object controller to start the animation of you bowling, and then that sends a message to hook you up to a spline to move you down, and then when you're released, there's another object that gives you an impulse. It's all scripted up. So when I finished scripting that room and had it all, and that room has the 3 bomb slots up top. There's a lot of stuff going on in there. There was like 300 objects in that room. So if you load it in the editor, it was just a sea of objects. And it was like, this is kind of getting untenable. So I approached the tools guys and said, hey, can we do some sort of like Photoshop layer system? And they said, sure. And so we implemented the ability to place objects on different layers, and you could toggle them on and off. And so, and then I reorganized the room. So like when you get bowled, there's a cinematic camera that comes back and follows you as you get bowled and all that. So I created a cinematic layer, and that's where I put the cinematic systems, and then, a layer that controls the impulses for the ball along the track. And once that was organized, then you load the room, and then you just turn on the stuff you're interested in. Because we realized that without that control and ability to filter objects, rooms would just get full of stuff. Right, because you have so many objects. Like I said, for that bowling sequence, you have a cinematic set of objects, which is probably 4 or 5 objects to control the camera and the spline and all that stuff. You've got the impulse stuff for the ball. You've got the trigger for the ball. You've got the object controlling the statue animation. Right, you've got object, and then and when you go up top and you bomb the slots, that rotates the centerpiece to I think there's 3 positions. And so when you bomb that, it sends a message to the object controller, which then tells another object, rotate this object 90 degrees over this period of time. Right. So, and you can just imagine it's just a crazy amount of objects. And why it took me a month to build that room. And so once we got the layers in, then it actually worked really well, because once we had the layers in, we got those pretty early because we knew there was a thing. And then I started handing off a lot of the cinematic type elements to one of the effects artists. Who wanted to do camera work. So he did a lot of the save station. I did like the first couple save station cinematics, and then he did the later ones, which are better than mine. He's a better camera guy than I am. And then he would just create a cinematic layer in the room, do his camera work, get the spline set up and all the camera transitions. And then, the save station would just send a message out saying save started, and then that would activate the cinematic camera, and then that would send the messages to do same as to do the animation and all that stuff. And so that was on a separate layer. And then he could just copy that to other rooms and make tweaks and stuff like that.
Right, right. And I heard that infinite ball bomb jumping was stopped because some rooms have no ceilings.
That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you think about putting like invisible ceilings or something, or was it just clearly nah, we're not doing it?
I don't know the decision on that. I think so. The collision. So what's interesting, like I said, I mentioned we made these blue rooms, which are just blueprint textures, and then the artist drew them. The collision volume is actually separate from the visual geometry. So what you're colliding against is actually a different set of planes. And so the collision geometry was almost usually just the blue room geometry itself, which converted into collision geometry, and then the artist would paint. And so a lot of times there was no geometry. It was built in 3D Studio Max and Maya. So there's no geometry in the ceiling. There's just no triangles up there. So that's why you can fly out. We could put a ceiling in, but again, it's one of those things that kind of breaks immersion. Like if some reason you could launch yourself up, if you bomb that high and you just hit an artificial ceiling, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. I think infinite bomb jumping would break a lot of puzzle design.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, I mean, there's lots of crazy sequence breaking in Metroid or in Metroid Prime already, which amazes me that it doesn't blow the game up sometimes, because when we did the Photoshop layer thing, we also did what's called master layers. And so a good example is, you defeat Flagra, you pick up the gravity suit or the Varia suit, and then you leave. And then when you come back, there's a couple of ghosts there. Those are what's called master layers. They define what's inside a room, and they change based on, when you pick up a suit, we change the master layer in that room. So that's why some rooms have different enemies later on in the game. If you sequence break, you can get the master layers confused about which ones are on or off. And speedrunners probably know this, but there are ways that if you sequence break in a certain order, you can get some rooms to load all of their master layers at the same time or on a memory crash. So the reason the first Metroid shipped, and then there was a couple sequence breaks that could crash the game because of this problem. And I put a couple door locks on the later version of the 1.02 version that shipped on the second pressing. And the speedrunners were like, "Why did you put those locks in?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Because if you got the stuff out of order, you could blow the game up." Like, it's not that I wanted to break sequence breaking. It's just, the game should never crash, right? So a lot of those locks were done because of that.
It sometimes feels like sequence breakers are trying to crash the game. A lot of times.
They're trying to find a way to. They're generally, the sequence breaking is done for speed reasons, right? And there are lots of ways to crash the game if you're like speedrunning or jumping out of the environment. And what amazes me is like the crazy thing is speedrunners that get out of the environment and know where the load triggers are for the rooms that I placed, and they'll wiggle themselves around to hit the load trigger that I put that trigger there to load the next room, because otherwise, if they don't hit that trigger, the room won't be there when they get there. Crazy stuff like that. And what's funny is speedrunners probably know sequence breaks that will break the game still, and they just avoid that because you crashing the game is not a speed run. So
well, that's right. Yeah. So I suppose the trigger system would be the reason why enemies respawn, right? Because you
enemies respawn because the room got unloaded.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're in an area and you go in the hallway and you get far enough in, this one gets unloaded, and the next one gets unloaded, and then you go back. We just have to load that room back in. That's why everything respawns.
Oh, so wow.
There's some rooms that don't get unloaded until, like, there's some rooms that are small enough that you can go through the hallway and go this room here, and it hasn't unloaded this room just because it's small enough maybe. And sometimes you'll come back, the enemies won't be there. So sometimes you have to go 2 rooms and then come back. But yeah, it's just the state of the room stays until we unload it.
So with the amount of tools that are available now, would it still have to be applied the same way if you would make the game today? Or would you be able to load multiple rooms at once? Taking into account obviously HD graphics and all of that stuff and the high.
I don't think that it's changed. Game consoles still have X amount of memory, and HD means you're using 8x as much memory for the same area, right? Because textures are that much higher res. I think you'd still probably have to do load systems. A good example is the new Jak and Daxter game Rift Apart. Whenever you go through those portals, they're actually loading those levels. Those are all streaming in. It's just the PlayStation 5 is incredibly fast at streaming because of the SSD. Right. And so it just takes a second or two. Right. But those are all streamed in. Their levels are huge and detailed and beautiful, and probably take multiple gigabytes of memory. Right. So it just scales. I'm still amazed that the Metroid, of course, was a standard def game, so it was 320 by 200 resolution, 240 in progressive, so 320 by 240, and we only had 24 megs on the GameCube, right? Yeah. So, and I think 4 megs of it was eaten up by the code, and so we had 20 megs left for everything else. I think the Samus model herself is a good meg or so. She's pretty detailed, and then I remember areas being about 4 to 5 megs, I think, is their general size. Some of the bigger ones can be up to like 10. But you've got everything there, all the objects and the sound and everything, and stuff in there. So memory management was a huge job on the game, and we did a lot of work. I wrote a lot of different code to handle memory, and all the engineers had to be very memory conscious. So, and there are other little things like one of the things we realized is when we shoot a door and they're loading the area behind it. So the area is streaming in, and then we have to decompress it. And after we decompress it, we have to go through and set up all the objects, like all the objects set up their state and get ready. And we noticed that when the area was finished loading, and then we would go, oh, okay, we'll go prepare the area to load. We'd get a good 3 to 4 frame skip, right? Because it's doing all this work of decompressing and all this stuff, right? And so there'd be a big hitch in the game. And so we realized we had to break it up. So the decompressor was modified to do it in little pieces over a few frames. And then as the room sets up, we would go through and set the room up over the next few frames. So after the room's loaded, it's actually probably another 10 to 20 frames at 60 hertz, so another second or so to set up everything in the room. So even after we're loaded.
Hello to all my fellow gamers. This episode of Kiwi Talks is proudly brought to you by Manscaped, and I'm here to talk to you about the Performance Package 4.0. Voila! And I'm going to start with the most obvious one, the Lawnmower 4.0, which is essential for all you gamers that sit there for like 7 hours a day just gaming. Because what's going to happen is your balls are going to get sweaty and those hairs are going to start sticking to your undies. And when you sit up, it's going to hurt. Not anymore with the Lawnmower 4.0 because you can reduce all those ingrown hairs. And this is smooth as silk, I tell you. Smooth as silk. Can't recommend this enough. And then on top of that, just for even better hygiene, you can use the Crop Preserver and Reviver, a cream and a deodorant to make your balls smell heavenly. Can't recommend it enough. And on top of that, we also have the Weed Whacker, which you can use to reduce all those hairs in your nostrils and in your ears. And if that wasn't enough, we have jockeys and a travel bag as well. This great package is available at manscaped.com. Just use the code KiwiTalks for 20% off plus free shipping. Yeah, because say with the Quadraxis boss in Prime 2, that's a massive room.
That's a huge room, yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge room. And then obviously you beat the boss and it triggers platforms to rise. And then if you go out of one of the rooms and you come back, enemies then spawn as well. So even
that's a master layer swing.
Yeah. So even something like that would take a whole lot of time, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because I suppose, would that be the biggest room out of the two games, out of Prime 1 and 2? That particular
I think in size, but I think in memory, I still think it's the Chozo Temple.
Yeah.
Artifact Temple. Yeah. I just remember being that we had to do some work to make sure we had everything enough memory to load that one. Because it's got that big vista, and then there's a lot of stuff in there, right? There's all the artifacts, there's Ridley, there's the end game cutscene is in there.
Yeah.
Everything is in there, right? So
because in Prime 2, because you can fall off cliffs, right? If you fall off a cliff and then you respawn.
Yeah.
How is that easy to script? I mean, what was
the
discussion with that?
There's basically just a big trigger down there. When you do it, we just teleport you back up essentially. You're bad. Here, you come back.
So is that always the discussion, trying to work out what would happen when she falls? Was it just always going to be a respawn? Yeah. Just a quick respawn.
And I think that came out because of the boost cannons. Because
yeah, of course, yeah.
Because if you miss, poof. We didn't want to just kill you, right?
Yeah.
Game over. No. So we put you back, and then that turned into they realized, hey, that's a pretty good mechanic, because players can miss especially with a space jump, right? There's just these huge gaps you have to make it across. You mistime your jump, bloop, and so. Yeah, the design was just okay, I think we do damage you a little bit if I remember right, but we do put you back.
Yeah.
I don't remember. Yeah.
You fall off a massive height, you don't lose any damage, but if you fall off the cliff, you lose a little bit of damage. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, that makes sense. That's fascinating. Because you didn't play Super Metroid until you got allocated to the team, right? You'd never played it.
That is correct. So, the 90s for me is I played a lot of Street Fighter 2. I used to play the pro level and stuff like that. Yeah, and I used to have every weekend all the guys I used to play at the local arcade. I was in Vancouver at the time, and every weekend everybody would come to my place, and we actually took Super Nintendo controllers, ripped them apart, went to the local arcade operator place, bought arcade joysticks and buttons, built our own boxes, and built arcade joysticks by soldering them to the SNES controller. So we could play Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo with arcade controls. And so, And then I became friends with a lot of people at the arcade. All the people played a lot, and they'd all come to our house, and we built controllers together and play every weekend. So yeah, I played a lot of Street Fighter in the '90s. So I kind of missed the whole Super Nintendo train because for me, the Super Nintendo device was a Street Fighter device.
Street
That's
Fighter
all I played.
device, yeah.
And it wasn't, and so I kind of missed the whole Metroid train. And it wasn't, I originally got hired at Retro to work on Thunder Rally, which was the car combat game
Yeah.
back in when things were getting started. And once the reorg happened, that was complicated and messy. I got assigned to Metroid, and I'm like, well, I could probably play this Super Metroid game since we're making kind of a sequel to it. And just like, holy crap, I missed this game. This game's incredible. I played through it twice in like 3 days. Like, just
Wow.
loved it, and just like, okay, now I understand why people want this game, and
Did you try and
yeah.
sequence break it?
No, just played through regularly.
Yeah. Because
I remember
you tried to put it in the game, didn't you? You tried to put it into Metroid Prime, but because it was a third-party license, Nintendo.
Yeah,
like,
so
no.
so I ported a SNES emulator to the GameCube and had it actually running, just for fun, and and then the talk, hey, could we make this a thing? And they were like, I don't know, we could ask. And so we asked, and then Nintendo was like, well, that's third-party code and a bunch of other stuff, so they kind of kiboshed that. But it started the idea churning, and they did have the NES emulations library that they had built for the GameCube, and so that turned into bringing the original Metroid into the game with the Game Link with Fusion. So while Super Metroid itself wasn't embedded in the game, that kind of created the idea and ended up with putting the original Metroid in the game, the NES emulator. I remember when we got the emulator code from Nintendo, it was a little challenging to implement because all the comments were in Japanese. We're like, So I've never seen Japanese C code before, so it was kind of interesting.
Did Tanabe maybe know what it meant? Could he translate
sure.
it?
We could translate it. So
yeah.
It's like, what does this comment mean? Yeah, it's pretty funny. Yeah, you had to set up your editor the right code page so you could read the Japanese characters. Because otherwise, if you load in a regular, American text editor, it's just a bunch of high bit character nonsense, right?
Yeah.
So you have to set the right character set or file set or whatever to actually read the kanji. So it was always fun. But anyway, it worked. The great thing is once we integrated the Metroid, or not the Metroid, the NES emulator, Nintendo did. Man, they did a really great job on that. That even emulated the flickering from the original NES. Like, because the NES had a certain amount of sprites you could display. Yeah. And there are parts of Metroid where you have too many things will flicker. And they duplicated that. Like, they duplicated that hardware exactly. So pretty impressive job, actually.
Yeah. How close did you work with Tanabe?
So I worked on him on some of the incinerator drone we tuned together. I remember having the conversation with him because the incinerator drone, its sequence is not predictable. Like when it does a fire blast, it's I think a random between 5 and 8 seconds. And I remember having a conversation with him about, he said it's random. Is that a good thing? And I remember having a conversation that I wanted to encourage the players to be reactive and that if it was a fixed sequence, then replays would not be as interesting. And so so I convinced him of that, actually. So I worked with him on the incinerator drone. I think I worked with him. I designed some of the Phazon Mines areas. So I did there's that room, which is very vertical, has a big window at an angle. I built that room. So, and then I worked with him with some of the design of the encounters in there. So, he was great to work with. Brilliant designer.
So was there anything that like Portal 2, for example? Because I know you worked a little bit on multiplayer with that, right? Was there any?
Yeah, I did
crossover between Prime and Portal in terms of.
So I did not work on any of Portal 2's design. For the multiplayer, I just did the multiplayer network programming. So I did did the lobbies, how you hook up with players and the actual moving the bits between the two different players and all that stuff. So I did the actual implementation of that. So I was not directly involved with any of the puzzle designs or anything like that. Because Portal 2 was actually, I think, being developed while I was working on Dota at the time. because I was a
Mm.
senior engineer on Dota 2. I did all the server work on Dota 2, the replay system, all the crazy stuff like that. So that was my primary focus. The Portal 2 was just kind of a little side gig to get the multiplayer working for co-op. So
Mm.
it was great because one of the benefits of not being directly involved with the Portal 2 team is I purposely kind of avoided them until they were mostly done with the game, so I could play it and enjoy it.
Well, yeah, that's right. I suppose if you're in the trenches and you're building it, then you
Yeah.
probably see all the flaws, and it's hard for you to appreciate it the way someone else would.
Yeah, like playing Prime today is still kind of weird to me because like I know how I know how the sausage was built, and so it's a little weird to play sometimes. Like, oh yeah, I remember doing that, and oh yeah, this thing, and some of the crazy tricks we had to do to make some things work. So,
Hmm.
but it's still a fun game. I mean, still, I haven't played for a long time. I remember when we were getting a few days from gold, and so we were all just kind of play testing, right? Because we're just waiting for final bugs and stuff to come through. And so I remember trying to speed run it, at that time, and I think I got 3.5 hours was my best run, which is
Wow.
pretty good. I think. Nowadays people do it in like an hour, which is crazy, but
Yeah, yeah.
and so, and it's just because, I played through the game probably 30, 40 times before, we were done. So, but it was fun. And every playthrough was just super fun. We knew we built something amazing.
Hmm. It'll be interesting to see like Prime 4 and how much they still keep and retain a lot of the stuff that you implemented from the first game.
So what's interesting, I left during the early development of Prime 3. I was a little bit burned out on Metroid at that point. I mean,
Yeah, fair
I
enough.
love the games, but I gave a lot of myself in those games. Like the work schedule for Prime and Prime 2 was pretty brutal. I was working 100-hour weeks on Prime 1 at the heyday there for months, and it
Yeah.
was pretty brutal. And I was looking for something else. But what was the question again?
Oh, we're about Prime 4 and how much they retained
Oh,
the
so
original
so
essence
so
of what you
when
did.
after Prime 3 shipped, and I heard through the grapevine that they're working on Donkey Kong Country, and I'm like, I'm thinking about, man, the scripting systems I built, and the camera systems that Mark built could be totally leveraged for a Donkey Kong game. So I
Hmm.
assume they just used all those systems to build Tropical Freeze, because like their generic scripting and camera systems, they would have been perfect for building a game like that. And I remember talking to some of the, meeting some of the devs later on there I hadn't seen in a while, and they were like, one of the challenges of building Donkey Kong was in Metroid, when you're designing an area, you're like, okay, so Samus is in this room. This is the lore of the room. This is what she's getting here and everything, and so you were putting Chozo lore on the walls, and a lot of the art is influenced by that and everything. In Donkey Kong, no, he just needs to get to the end level to get some bananas. There's not really any lore to it, right? And they say that's actually a big change of mindset when you're designing a level.
Yeah.
So it was fun hearing them talk about that.
Well, they still
But
implemented some cool camera systems. So I
yeah,
wonder how much of that was based on your work and Mark H. Hutchison's
almost
cameras.
almost certainly based on Mark's work.
Yeah.
So the because like I said, we had many different camera systems. There was service camera, the spindle camera, there were camera arc systems. There was all kinds of different ways you could do it. So I'm certain that was all leveled. I actually miss a lot of the engine we built to the retro engine we built for making the Metroid games. Just the systems we built could be used to build all kinds of crazy, awesome games.
Yeah.
And when I move into other game systems or engines, I worked on WoW, and I worked on the Source engine and stuff like that. And some of it's missing and some of it's different. And I'm like, I do. One thing I did miss is just the whole camera systems that Mark built. Like they were just so easy to use and so incredibly powerful.
So
So
it would be safe to assume they'd still use the same engine, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they wouldn't move to Unreal or anything. They'd probably just
Uh,
still use the same.
yeah, although it's probably getting a little dated now. I mean, it's been 2 decades. So the basis is probably still there. So they probably have to rewrite the renderer at this point, because the renderer was definitely specific to the GameCube hardware. So I imagine they'd have to plug in a new renderer, which they could effectively grab something like Unreal or Unity and use its renderer and use the scripting system from Rude in that. They can
Ah.
even do a hybrid like that. That's even possible. I don't know what they're doing, but there's lots of different ways you could approach it.
Yeah, yeah, of
Um,
course, of course. So, what was the reason you retired? Just burnout, overcrunch, stupid hours?
um, well, I've been working continuously for 32 years, right? My first game shipped in January 1990. I started working on it in late '89.
That
It
is a
was
long time. Yeah.
yeah, it was the PC version of the board game Stratego, licensed by Milton Bradley. So I was doing the PC version. The original engineer was actually building the Mac version, and so he was the one that actually built the AI and everything. So I was just doing the PC port of that for a small game developer in Vancouver called Mindspan. It was like I think four guys at the company. I was one of them,
Yeah.
and so it was a license from Accolade to do the port, and so that was my first game that shipped back in January 1990. And been working on games after that. I worked on Joe Montana Football and a couple other titles there, and then I actually moved to one of the first internet companies in Vancouver called MindLink, because this is like 1991, 92, and
Wow.
so internet was just starting to become a thing. And so I spent 4 years there working on one of the first internet providers, which was run, and back then it all ran on Unix, right? So because
Yeah, yeah.
Windows did not, you didn't use Windows for running internet stuff. And so I learned how to work on Unix, and Linux was just becoming a thing then, and internet stuff. So I learned internet protocols and networking. And then that company, eventually that company got bought by one of the first internet companies called iStar, and I moved to Ottawa where their corporate office was. And this is in '96, and then Quake came out and changed everything. And
With your
I
awesome
love
capture the
I
flag
love
mod. Awesome.
yeah. And then I made three-wave capture the flag, and next thing I know, a few months later, I'm working for id. And because I had experience from the internet provider days of doing multiplayer network programming and Unix stuff, I became the multiplayer and network and Linux guy for id. And so I did the Linux ports of Quake World and Quake 2 and Quake 3 and all that stuff, and as well as three-wave CTF. So that was always fun.
So when you say
So
you didn't take any time off, do you mean that you literally never took any time off during
not
that
really.
time?
The only break
Like
I ever
only
had,
Christmas break sort of thing? Or
Christmas
is
breaks and occasional week here or there for family vacation or something, but never really anything. The only longest break I took is in 2012. I took a 3 month break at Valve. That was after I think Left 4 Dead 2 shipped, or no, Dota. Yeah, Left 4 Dead 2 had shipped, and Dota was in some development, and I just needed a break, so I took a 3 month sabbatical at the end of 2012. But that's the only long break I'd ever taken, and so I've been continuously employed for 32 years. And honestly, I just wanted to step back for a bit and
well, fair
take a
enough.
break. It's been a hell of a ride. I've worked
Oh,
I've worked with so many amazing people and so many amazing games. It's just been an incredible a career, and just the memorable parts of the people, just
hmm.
just incredible people, that I loved working with, and just seeing some of the creativity people can do to come together and build something. I mean, one of the things for me, the biggest fun of game development is when you finish the game, you give it to people and you watch them play and you see how much they enjoy it, see how much they love it. That is what it's all about, right?
Hmm.
Bringing entertainment to people, giving them an incredible experience and a good time, and just fun, have fun. And that to me is just the moment. And that's why I love shipping games. Like, it was funny because when I was at Valve is very flat and everything, but I kind of like I worked on all kinds of stuff. Like I did a little work on Counter Strike, I did a little work on Portal 2, I did a little bit of work on like Steam VR, Steam VR Home, because as those projects were nearing shipping, they would grab me to come finish it to ship. I was known as a finisher. It's like, if you want to ship, grab Zoid because he loves shipping things. So, which I do. I mean, I love getting stuff into people's hands.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So,
So
so given how you worked relentlessly for so long, when you did take a step back, was it jarring or hard for you to do to kind of take a step back because you're always like this? always on the go? Was it
Actually, not too well. So I just what I did is you know being the focused person I did, I literally made a list of here's the games I want to play that I haven't played before. Here's the TV shows I want to watch, and I've literally been going through the list. I've never watched Breaking Bad, so I went and watched that. I'm watching Titans right now on Netflix because that's the current next one on my list.
right?
I played through Undertale. I played through a bunch of different games over the last little while, just to finish to go through. Inscription I played through recently, loved it. So I've actually just changed that energy into a different area of enjoying a lot of gaming and TV and stuff like that. I've also been working on my home arcade. I love classic games, so I've been buying a lot of the arcade one-up cabinets and modding them and building a home arcade. I just finished putting together their Pong cabinet, which is a really cool cocktail. So that's my current project is just build that home arcade. I have a room that dedicated my little home arcade room. So just channeling that energy into new stuff, and I'm enjoying it so far. I mean, it's been 6 months. I don't know. I'm only in my 50s, so never say never. You can always see, maybe there's a game project in the future. We'll see. Right now, I'm enjoying the break.
Well, you look happy. You're glowing, so that's good. You got that high energy, so that's good to see. So, if anyone wants to follow you and keep up to date with anything, what's the best way to do that? Is Twitter the best way to do it?
I think Twitter is probably the best way. I actually, post on Twitter occasionally these days, and it seems to be becoming the platform. I mean, it's a long cry from the plan files we had back in the id Software days, but yeah, Twitter. I'm at Zoid CTF at Twitter because Zoid was taken, of course. But
yeah.
So, I'm on LinkedIn as well. So if any people in the industry can always connect with me there. So
yeah, I love your little rants on Twitter about NFTs. By the way, they always give me a laugh.
There's cool tech there, but it's being used in incredibly abusive ways right now.
That's technology, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess. But the problem is there's no brakes on this right now. Right? It's just people are being exploited just hugely right now, and it's getting grifted and all that stuff, and it's really bothers me. And so and the whole NFTs and gaming thing, like, what was it? The Linkin Park guy was like, yeah, I want an NFT so I can have a skin that works in Minecraft and Halo and everything. And all the game devs are like, you're crazy, dude. There's no way that works. Like, I remember when I think some game shipped and we wanted to put a hat in Team Fortress 2 to celebrate the launch on the game on Steam. That takes an artist has to spend a few days building the hat. We have to get a licensing deal worked out with the publisher of the game that's launching. I mean, you're talking probably man weeks of work just to make a hat and work in one other game. And you weren't talking about a skin that works across multiple games, dude. This is not going to happen, like physically, and from a name standpoint, like from ownership standpoint, what's the difference between an NFT and a row in a database table that tells you own the object, which is what we do today, right?
Yeah.
When you buy an item in Dota 2, like a cosmetic, there's a database row that says you own this cosmetic, right? So an NFT is just a really environmentally expensive version of that. Yeah, I could rant for NFT for a long time. So.
Well, hey, I appreciate you taking time out from your gaming time and television time, I'm sure, to do this. So I very much appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been fun talking about building an amazing game and the people I worked with. Like I said, it's just I missed that team. There was just some incredible people, and of course, unfortunately, a few of us have left us. Mark Haychach and the late Andy O'Neill, which were both incredible people to work with. And I don't think I'll ever work with a team that amazing again.
It was a very special team with a certain caliber of individual that, it can't be replicated.
Yeah.
I don't think. No.
Yeah. Amazing group. Love it.
Well, you've got an amazing legacy. I mean, I could easily talk to you for 8 hours about every single game that you've worked on, but I won't. So that is the show, everyone. Make sure you share, like, and subscribe. And until next time, stay safe.